Welcome to Writer Pants on Fire, where authors talk about things that never happened to people who don't exist. We also cover craft, the agent hunt, query trenches, publishing industry, marketing, and more. I'm your host, Mindy McGinnis. You can check out my books and social media at mindymcginnis.com, and make sure to visit the Writer Pants on Fire blog for additional interviews, query critiques, and more at writerpantsonfire.com. Make your pages look professional with Vellum. Margins, headers, page numbering, font, line spacing all happen automatically with every book you create. Generate ebooks for Kindle, Apple Books, Kobo, and others, or deliver a beautiful print book to your readers. Visit tryvellum.com/pants to learn more. Vellum. Create beautiful books. Have you ever wondered what inspires the people who create our cultural touchstones? On the Spark Parade podcast, your host, Adam Oons, geeks out with artists and entertainers about their cultural spark of inspiration. Everything from Shakespeare to South Park. You'll hear from artists like Connor Oberst on Northern Exposure, Roisin Murphy on Terrence Conrad's The House Book, and Charlene Spiteri on Paris, Texas. The Spark Parade, where artists reveal cultural inspirations to spark the inspiration in you. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're here with Emily Hornburg, author of The Cursed Queens, book one of which, The Knights Chosen, came out October 6th of 2020. So Emily is no stranger to pandemic publishing. I can't even imagine. And with your debut too, am I right?
Yes.
So I can say I had a book come out in 2020 and it did okay. I think it was essentially my 10th book. And so I had a readership built in, and that was lovely, and I'm sure helped me out. But I saw the impact of that pandemic. So I would love to hear about publishing as a debut author. I know that you also have mentioned to me that your query journey was just difficult. It was a slog through the trenches, which it is for many, many people, myself included. But then to debut during COVID, I don't know if you could just tell us a little bit about both those things. Tell us about your publishing journey, and then also that almost anticlimactic, or maybe super climactic, however you want to look at it, time of debut.
It's definitely been a journey. I mean, I've always wanted to be an author. And so I really started pursuing that in my mid-20s, when I was actually finally figuring out how it actually worked, like what it took to write a book that could get published, what the query process was, and all of that. You actually critiqued one of my queries.
Nice.
It was for an urban fantasy, and you gave me really great feedback. But I remember you saying, just a heads up, no one is taking urban fantasy right now. And guess what? You were totally right. No one wanted my book. So after that, after I got a million rejections for that one, which that was a few years between writing it and querying it, I went back to the book I have published now, which is an adult fantasy retelling of Snow White. And the rest of the books are going to be other fairy tale retellings as well. That one also kind of had an interesting journey. And so I was very hesitant to start querying it, because I was just like, I'm going to put all this effort into this book and now no one's going to want this one. And so I kind of was slowly querying it out, but then I decided to get ready for Pitch Wars. And so I worked really hard on it and getting it polished up and getting it ready to go for Pitch Wars. And I was not chosen that year. I did make some connections with one of the mentors that I submitted to, Paris Winters. And she and I emailed back and forth a lot during the pitch wars process. I remember on Twitter, like, she was very interested in my book when I would mention it. After the fact, she told me, you don't realize how close your book was to being picked. Like, you did very well. So please don't feel like this is a failure by any means. But she kind of took me under her wing, even though I wasn't actually one of the people who she picked. Like, once Pitch Wars was over and that whole process was done several months later, she was willing to look over my book again and help me through that revision process. And so then she actually met an editor for City Owl Press at the Romance Writers of America conference. And she was like, I think you would really like this book. So she, in a way, acted like my agent and pitched it to this editor. They had me send it out to her. And then I waited several months later. And by that time, it was time for the next Pitch Wars. I'll go ahead and just submit my book again, because I've definitely changed it a lot since the last year. So I submitted it again, and I did terribly. I was like, well, maybe I just need to scrap this book too. No one's wanting it. And then December 1st, I got the letter from my editor saying that they wanted to bring it on.
Just to be clear, you went through this whole process to publication without an agent, correct?
Yes. I queried some agents, and when I got the email from the City Owl Press saying that they want to take my book on, I did do the standard 2 weeks where I emailed the people who already had my query just to let them know, hey, I have this publishing house who wants to take my book. Anybody interested? All of them said, hey, that's awesome. Best of luck. Bye. So I was like, all right, cool. Which was fine, because all you need is the one. So that was really exciting. And then originally my book was supposed to be published this year in 2021, but they hadn't given me an exact date yet. It was beginning of 2020, early spring. I just emailed them. I was just like, hey, like, do you even have like a general idea? And they're like, actually, yeah. Do you want to publish it in October of this year? And I was like, okay.
And then, of course, you had no idea that you were agreeing to publish right when the world had kind of shut down. So did you have any plans in place in terms of promotion, like signings or public appearances that ended up getting canned? Like, did you have to suddenly reroute all of the promotional things that you had planned?
I had been planning for it to come out the next year. So I hadn't even begun that process yet. So at least in that sense, it was kind of nice because I didn't have to rearrange things. But it did make it very challenging to get that promotion process even started. Because even now, even though things are opening up, as I'm trying to reach out to local bookstores, because I live in the Chicago area. And so, like, we have tons of bookstores and big art scene around here. And so even now, trying to reach out to these bookstores, because it's a smaller press. And so you kind of have to, like, ask them to carry your book. We would love to carry it, but just because this was such a hard year, we're literally only ordering the things we know are guaranteed to sell. Maybe like approach us again when things open up even more and like we're a little bit better on our feet. So that's just been a struggle. Or like my local Barnes & Noble that I go to all the time. One of the managers, she was like super excited about the book. But because of COVID, they weren't able to do their usual local author stuff that they do every quarter that she was going to invite me to. So it's been a challenge just kind of trying to even just locally get my name out there. There was one thing pre-publication I was going to do with my local library because they do like a mini Comic-Con at my local library. And I was going to do a little writing workshop, but of course that had to get canceled.
It's hard. I'm traditionally published with a big press, but honestly, the tried and true methods of doing those local appearances and showing up and shaking hands and beating the pavement, that is what actually I think has a real impact. When I say local, I mean like tri-county area because I live very rurally. You know, I do events at libraries. I'm very fortunate to be living pretty much right in the center of Ohio. So I can go anywhere in my state, pretty much a 3-hour drive. So I always tell people, if you're in Ohio, I'll drive to you. We'll work something out. And so when I was first getting on my feet, I sometimes charged, for the first year, I charged absolutely nothing. I just wanted to show up and say, hi, I'm Mindy and I wrote a book and I'm from Ohio. And, you know, now I charge for appearances, but I keep it within the realm of possibility for all socioeconomic levels, just because I grew up very rurally and I didn't meet an author until I myself was published. So it's like, I want to be able to put myself in front of kids and adults anywhere. It makes a huge impact. Doing those events, doing local library things, doing village festivals. That's what I do. I do Christmas in the village and that kind of thing. And I do it in my hometown and I do it in the next town over. Just really those, here I am and you know me and I wrote a book. It gets people excited and it works. And not being able to do that, not being able to have that grassroots startup available to you as a debut, I think that would be really like crushing.
Yeah, it was really tough because the area of Chicago that I live in the southwest suburbs. And so even just in my area, because most of the bookstores, like the independent ones and stuff, are more on the north side. And so even just reaching out to them, where it's like you kind of feel awkward like reaching out to them because like they're local, but at the same time, like in Chicago, like the difference between the south side and the north side, like it could be like a 3-hour drive. It's kind of odd even just reaching out to them because it's like, I'm local, but not really.
In Ohio, I just say local means the whole state in Ohio.
Yeah, because there's even one bookstore that has 3 branches, and the closest one to me was maybe like a half-hour away, which wasn't too bad. But that one ended up closing during COVID, of course. And that was one of the few people who was like, yes, we would love to carry your book. And then they closed. And I was like, ah. But they had even restrictions on their local author program on your mile radius that you could be in for the store. And so thankfully, at least for the next closest one, I'm like just within their mile radius. It's been tough. So I'm really hoping now that things are opening up a little bit more, because my next book is supposed to come out in March of next year. So I'm hoping that even though I'm not stopping promotion for book 1 at all, to kind of like almost in a way start from scratch with book 2 and leading up to book 2. So that way like people can kind of read book 1 in preparation for book 2. And that's kind of what I'm hoping right now.
Of course. Well, and I would think too, as an indie author in a fairly densely populated area, where I'm from is tiny. There are 2 or 3 people who have gone like the indie route or self-published. And that's like in a not dense population. So I can't even imagine trying to not only stand out in a bookstore in general, but even to stand out within, like you're saying, a certain mile radius when the population is so dense.
Yeah, there's a lot out here, and it's like in the suburbs and in the city, of course. And so it is difficult to like make yourself stand out a little bit more. I have had like a really great support system, and like one of the perks of being with the small press is they really help you get to know the other people that are published with your press. And so like we have like little Facebook groups for like all of the authors, and then we have like a Facebook group for all the authors as well as all the editors and all of us. So that's had been really, really helpful just to be able to have that support system. So that way all the others who were also having their debut novel published in the same year, we could kind of all support each other and be there for each other.
I know that even among debut groups in the traditional publishing world, we do form groups that are debuting in the same year. So I came out in 2013. So there was a general group of YA and middle grade authors called the Lucky 13s. And then there was a smaller group called the Class of 2K13, which is actually where both of those groups, I've met some of the people that are my critique partners now and friends that I talk to every day. And like you're saying, just other people in the publishing industry that you can say, hey, did you run into this? Or what do you think I should do with this? Or, hey, let me bounce something off you. Or, you know what? I just booked an event and I showed up and literally 0 people came, which has happened to me actually 3 times. So having a traditional publisher, even being with a big publisher, it doesn't mean that the red carpet is rolled out for you and everything is fine. I can say that for sure.
Hopefully I'll be able to do more in-person stuff soon, because I think that's going to be a really big help.
Oh, for sure. I think in person, I love it. Some authors aren't necessarily comfortable in front of crowds, so they're not good at public speaking. A lot of people don't like to do readings and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I am like, I don't care. I will juggle fiery knives, whatever you need from me. I am here and I will entertain you.
I was a theater major in college, so I'm hoping that'll help me out.
Oh, it'll help. It'll help. Trust me. Not a lot of writers are good speakers, so any type of stage experience actually helps a lot.
Vellum. It just works. Best-selling indie author Alex Liddell, whose book Enemy Contact, an enemies to lovers romantic suspense, hit number 25 in the Amazon paid Kindle store, has this to say about Vellum. There are always a ton of hangups in the publishing process, from the printer running out of ink at just the wrong moment to Amazon rejecting margins. But Vellum has been one program I can depend on. It formats my manuscripts quickly, professionally, and, most importantly, in a way that never gets rejected by any online retailers. Visit www.tryvellum.com/pants to learn more. That's tryvellum.com/pants. Vellum. It just works.
You also are someone that I wanted to talk to about disability representation in fiction and in media. You yourself have a physical disability that you were born with. So why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about that and how you use that to inform your fiction?
I have a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. We all just call it OI because that's a really big mouthful. Essentially, it's brittle bones disease. You probably know it. There was an episode of Grey's Anatomy where she was pregnant with, of course, the most severe case of OI ever invented to make it really dramatic. I think there was an episode of Bones about it once, which I felt like they didn't use it as much as they could have, and it was very disappointing. And I think there was an episode of Call the Midwife. I think they had an episode in case people want to look those up. But yeah, so basically, I have very fragile bones. I was diagnosed when I was about 1.5 years. Essentially, the doctor described at the time my bones were like a stick of butter. It was how fragile they were. And so I also have very short stature. Not everybody with OI has a short stature, but it's very common. So I'm only about 4'2", which is the first thing people usually notice. But I don't have the same body shape as someone with dwarfism, so it kind of confuses people a little bit. Yeah, so by the time I was 11, I had at least 20, we call them hip spica casts, which is essentially a cast that goes from your feet up to your chest. Because at the time, that was the best way to keep your femurs still when you were a kid and it was broken. So I broke a lot of femurs, and I've got rods in all my bones because my bones suck at being bones.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I had long leg braces for a long time. I used a walker for a long time. I graduated to no braces and no walker, but then I used a wheelchair in high school, not because I couldn't walk, but just because it was like, hey, you have to carry heavy books that weigh more than you and battle really crowded hallways. So this will probably be safer for you to navigate those things. And I still use a wheelchair on occasion for like long distance stuff. So I call myself a wheelchair part-timer.
Okay.
Yeah, but I remember as a kid, I kind of dreaded seeing kids with disabilities on TV or in books and movies and stuff, just because it was all so badly done. Like, I remember growing up wanting a wheelchair, not necessarily because I needed one, but just because I was like, well, that's what everybody thinks disability is. And so therefore, if I have a wheelchair, I will be like all of the other disabled kids. And it will like make sense. And it was always as kind of like the very important message episodes and like, oh, the kid in the wheelchair is here to teach you a very special lesson. I just kind of like got used to being the weird one. So when I got older, I remember reading The Fault in Our Stars. And even though obviously kids battling cancer and someone having brittle bones are completely different things, but just like the discussion the character had about being a kid and being a teenager in the hospital and those experiences, or the way people would stare at them, or even just the things of like, this is the part of being sick that nobody wants to talk about, but this is my reality. I just really connected with it, and I had never had felt like that before reading or watching something. And that was kind of when I started thinking more about like, wow, like this was really cool that someone actually kind of gets it. I don't have many main characters who have disability. Later in the series I'm working on, who has a disability, who's the main character. Right now she's a side one. And so, but I really want to try and have them in the books, even if they're a side character, just existing. Like, I never want to write something where I'm like, I'm going to write a great American novel about someone overcoming their disability and making it get this big thing, but just a person who has it.
Having not read The Fault in Our Stars, I was a librarian when The Fault in Our Stars came out. All kids would walk in and be like, I want to read The Fault in Our Stars. I'm like, okay, here you go. Like, I don't need to promote The Fault in Our Stars. It's like, I have to go read things that they're not going to ask for, and then I can pitch it to them. But I know the experience of not seeing things done correctly, or your own experience being represented poorly. Like I said, I grew up very rurally, pretty economically disadvantaged area, and, you know, very Midwest. I just kind of rail against most media and book, film, TV portrayals of essentially country rural dwellers. They're always like racist, sexist, tobacco spitting assholes. And it's like, you know, I grew up here, and those people are here. They're also in the city, maybe not the tobacco, but it's there. I never see a good representation. Very rarely do I see a good representation of, you know, small town rural without it being kind of tongue-in-cheek, dumb hick side eye. While I can't speak to, you know, having a disability or seeing that portrayed in, like you're saying, the very special episode of Blossom, right? I mean, it's like, exactly. I remember, and that was always a thing. And it was very othering. It was very much like, we're gonna give some space to this, and then you know, give ourselves a gold star.
Yeah, exactly. And like, cause even, the TV show Glee, which I will fully admit, I am the last Gleek. Everyone is welcome to judge me. I judge myself. It's okay. You know, they had the character of Artie, and there was so much like potential with that character. And in some ways they did him really well, because he was the one in the wheelchair. But almost every time there was an episode that focused on him as the main character, the plot line had something to do with his wheelchair and with his disability.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of disappointing because I was like, oh man, like you have so much potential with this character. He sings and he has all these other interests and he's kind of a jerk, but in a way that's refreshing because he's not just the inspirational kid. It wasn't until a later season, which is when most people dropped off of the show, that they didn't get to see, like there was a great episode when he got to college and he was magically a ladies' man where he hadn't been when he was in high school. And he had an STD. And that was what the episode was about. And I was like, this is awesome. Finally. Like, not that I'm cheering on STDs, but like, it was finally he had a plot line that wasn't necessarily related to the wheelchair.
Yeah. He just had a college kid problem.
Exactly.
First STD. That would be a very special episode. Something that people do talk to me about occasionally, but not all that often, representations of faith, specifically in my case, Christianity, in YA fiction. So again, when we speak of what I usually see in YA fiction, middle grade I can't speak to as much, but definitely in YA fiction, usually when there is, for example, a minister, they're usually not someone you would want for a dad or a mom. Like they're just not, there's usually something either controlling or downright shady and gross going on. One of my best friends was a preacher's kid. And his dad was awesome and like just a great guy. Like he was our minister, but he was also just like everybody's dad and like a cool guy. And you'd go over to their house and he'd be like, making hot dogs. I find myself becoming very frustrated whenever I see a character that is defined by their religion. They don't swear and they've never been to a party, or if they go, it's played for laughs, right? I grew up a Christian and I don't even want to share how much I drank, like my weight before I graduated from high school, right? They're real people. It's so frustrating to me that, you can't be a Christian, and this is of course true everywhere, but you can't be a Christian and also, have sex or drink or, basically have any fun or swear. You have a degree in theology. I have a degree in comparative religions. And so glad that I do. I can't say that it landed me any major jobs, but, I'm glad I have. Talk a little bit about your degree in theology. And, I myself, some people have seen it. Some people have reached out and pointed it out to me or said that they noticed it. I slip nods into my writing. And I think that you mentioned that you do too.
Yeah. So I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian household. We're Lutherans, which in the Christian world, Lutherans were like unicorns. We're always just like very excited when we find another Lutheran. So I just want to like throw that in there. Oh my God, seriously?
Yes.
That just made my day. So I grew up LCMS.
I'm ELCA.
So you're like the liberals. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, super little. It's funny. It's so funny actually. I've been dating someone new for a little bit now, and I was at a gathering like after her graduation, and it was really funny because the guy I've been seeing came like to a family event, and it was one of his first family events, and the crowd kind of started to thin out mid-afternoon. I looked around and I was like, okay. It's like, we can crack out the beer now. It's just the church people. And he's like, what? And I was like, no, we're good. It's just everyone from church drinking is fine now.
Right. That's hysterical. I love it. Oh my gosh. I actually was a youth director for all. That was like my degree was director of Christian education. And then it included it was a required minor in theology. And then I had concentrations in youth and theater ministry. So I was an overachiever and did all the things. And so I was a youth director for a little while after college until I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. And part of it, one of the many reasons was writing. And I was like, well, I can't really write what I want to write and still be a youth director.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And so, but I never wanted to like villainize religion. Religion plays actually a big part in my book, In the Knights Chosen, but it's definitely not a Christian religion at all. It's like multi-gods, and they dedicate themselves to a god and get magic from it and all that stuff. But I never wanted to make the religion itself villainized, but there's definitely critique of the religion, because I definitely am a fan of like absolutely critique and like talk about, you know, where things go wrong, like where we can improve and all of those things. But I just, while the representation sometimes of faith and the negative connotations like is definitely there, it's like there's still so much more than just that. And so I never wanted to villainize the religion itself, but just point out that maybe some of the ways that we've twisted it, which that was really fun. And actually like building the religion was like one of the most fun parts of it. And so the people who have read it and know me and my family, but they aren't like religious leaders, like they're the ones who end up being like, oh, like I don't know how I feel about reading about a pagan religion.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not real, by the way. Like this is all made up. Like it's like I'm not telling you to believe this because this is pretend. Like this is it's fantasy. Like none of this is real.
Right. Like I said, I was a librarian for a long time in a school. And when Harry Potter came out, and some people were having fits about it, and I talked to, I didn't really ever have any official complaints, but, you know, there were conversations, and, you know, a parent had said something to me about witchcraft, and I was like, well, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go home, and I want you to try one of the spells. And if it works, let me know. Then there's a problem.
That's a great answer. I love that.
You know, it's like, I freaking wish the Accio worked. I would just...
That would be great.
And call things to me constantly. But, you know, it doesn't. So it's like, that's the kind of thing. You're right. Like, there's a couple different things going on there where, you know, you can write about create an entirely new and different religion, and that scares people because they're scared. Like, just even the concept is a little bit scary to them because it's not known. And the other thing is, if you use an already existing religion, that also can just be a minefield. So I find myself very, very carefully whenever I do use any type of like mentioning actually like religion outright, or some nods that maybe only somebody with a really deep steeping in symbology is going to understand. It's what I was raised in, and it's what I grew up in, and, you know, really, really formative for me. And while I still live in the community and I still go to the church that I grew up in and was baptized in and was confirmed in and was married in, I didn't get divorced in the church. I wish they did that.
That would be great.
But, you know, everything else, yes, you know, and it's just such a part of my life that tends to surprise people when I talk about it, because, you know, I write about very, very dark things, and I write about things that are really scary to a lot of people. I write about addiction, and I write about rape culture, and I write about violence. When I do identify myself as a Christian, a lot of people are very surprised, and I'm like, well, it's because I'm a human, guys.
Right.
It's a weird corner that I find myself in. One of my ex used to tell me, he said, you know, you don't exist, right? Because you're a liberal Christian. And I was like,
yeah, it feels like that sometimes, doesn't it?
It feels that way. But I told him, I was like, there is more of us than you think. It's just that we're not loud.
There are.
We don't.
Yep, it's true.
TV shows.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. We don't have TV shows.
No.
If they do have TV shows, I would be very skeptical anyway. So
Yeah. Last thing, why don't you let listeners know where they can find you online and where they can find your first book, The Knight's Chosen, and when they can be looking for the second as well.
You can find me pretty much anywhere online with E. Hornburg. So 2 E's, HORNBURG. That's my username on Instagram, Twitter, all of those things. I'm mostly on Instagram. That's where you'll find me the most active. So my website is emilyhornburg.com. There you can get my newsletter and find everything about my books. You can find The Knight's Chosen. It's definitely on Amazon, but even though it's not in physical bookstores, if you go to like barnesandnoble.com or like your favorite bookstore website, you can still purchase it online, which is great. So I always encourage people to use bookshop.org if you want the physical copy particularly, since that will support your local indie bookstores.
Writer, Pants on Fire is produced by Mindy McGinnis. Music by Jack Corbel. Don't forget to check out the blog for additional interviews, writing advice, and publication tips at writerpantsonfire.com. If the blog or podcast have been helpful to you, or if you just enjoy listening, please consider donating. Visit writerpantsonfire.com and click Support the Blog and Podcast in the sidebar.